What's up, guys? Welcome to Choose Podcast. My name is Salman Ali at Salman Ali NBA on Twitter. Here joined by Josh Lloyd, the lead fantasy basketball analyst at Basketball Monster, as well as the host of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. How are you doing today, Josh?
I'm good, Salman. It's good to be here. Finally, good to be on your show. I've heard you on so many different shows, and it's just it's good to be on chatting to you about the Rockets.
Oh, same to you. Same to you. So the reason I brought you on today, Josh, is frankly from an analysis standpoint. I think you're probably one of the 10 best covering the NBA today. And I think that the reason that you're so good at it is because you do it from this unique perspective, right? Like, I played fantasy basketball for 10 years. And if you're playing in a competitive league, you have to be so well versed in what's happening around the NBA. Like, you pretty much have to have an idea of what's going on with all 30 teams. And your job as an analyst is to give like an edge to those people, to advise those people. So you have to be even more on top of it because your average player in a competitive league is just looking for that edge anywhere they can get it. And when I watch your show on YouTube, which I've done, for a very long time, as I said, like, you have such a detailed perspective on every team in the league. Like, I've seen you jump on a podcast about the Hornets or the Magic and have almost the same level of comfort discussing the team as the person who's interviewing you, right? And frankly, I don't think most people covering the NBA at large have that comfort. By nature, they kind of have to focus their coverage on the best teams and the best players in the league because those are the things that drive the most interest to their content. And I totally understand why that happens. That's not a criticism. That's just the nature of the business. But I think it gives someone like you a leg up because the nature of your job requires you to stay on top of everything. And that's not just necessarily the things that draw the most eyeballs, because a nugget you drop on your podcast about a player on the Hornets, for example, may just help someone win their league. Right. So First, I want to give you that compliment. I think you're very good at what you do. And second, do you agree or disagree with that sentiment?
Do I agree that I'm one of the best 10? I don't know about that, but I do agree that I do have to pay attention to the entire league. Right. It is what I have to do. And you're right that there'll be people who are covering the NBA that won't know what's happening with the 13th man on the Charlotte Hornets, or how is the backup center rotation looking for the Magic, whereas I'm watching and go, hey, they're leaning a little bit towards Goga Badadze here, so maybe let's see what happens at the end of the season. And then he comes and starts 3 games down the stretch in April. Like, that's the sort of stuff. Then I've got to know what every single player in every roster is doing and have an understanding of what it means right now, but what it means in a week's time, how the organization then views that, what it means for the future, and all that sort of stuff. It's a lot to do, but that is how I have to do my job, is knowing all 500 plus players and how they're all fitting in with their current organization and current and future long-term plans, all that sort of stuff.
So obviously, I create content about the Houston Rockets, and this is a Rockets podcast. And I think the reason you're a good person to have on for this is so much of your job is projecting what a player is going to produce, right? Mm-hmm. Like, every year before, I think even the preseason, you're creating this ranking for B-Ball Monster, and you're constantly updating that ranking in real time based on what's happening. And I think that sometimes it's impossible. That's an impossible job with young players because, the Rockets have a lot of those players, and on that list, you're looking at a bunch of players with a different role set for the team. Let's start with a simple question, Josh. Who is going to be the best / most productive player for the Rockets this season, in your opinion?
Okay, so if I just take that a step back to last season, in terms of just who I think the best player was last season, I think it was Alperen Şengün. And I don't really think it was particularly close. Right. But I had a lot of queries about how he was going to be used. Would Ime Udoka fall into this guy sucks on defense, which I've been in depth on my show. I think he doesn't suck on defense. I think he's okay. I think he's average to okay. Like, he's not the worst defender. He's fine. But if they want the more aggressive style of defense that Tari Eason provides, does that mean they push Jabari more to the 5? Does their pursuit of Brook Lopez in the offseason means that the front office is not 100% aligned on Şengün as that guy? We know that Udoka was having a lot of input in the free agent signing, so was he like a little iffy on that? So yeah, Şengün was the incumbent, but the roster's changed so much. It's very hard for me to go past Fred VanVleet as the best player on this roster. Yeah, he comes in as a new guy. He's got to sort of fit around. He is 30, but I would say that he enters the season as the best player. Whether he exits as the best player, I'm not sure, but I think given the contract he was given and the position that he holds and how important he is to the development of everyone else, you really want him to be the best player. Whether that's the highest score or not, that doesn't really matter. It's can you do so many different things? And I think that, until we actually see regular season stuff go down, it's hard for me to go past him, but Şengün's pretty close to it.
So I'm 100% in line with you. I obviously, in my opinion, like the best minute-to-minute player on the Rockets in 9 category leagues is I think Alperen Şengün. Like he's a very strong scorer, rebounder, and he shoots well from the field and the free throw line. And for the longest time, there hasn't been, as you said, the proper level of organizational belief that he can be a winning talent for various reasons. You mentioned the defense. Now, you and I were very critical of Stephen Silas the past few years for moves like having Bruno Fernando start the season, right?
Yep.
Like, as everyone knows, the front office, went hard after Brook Lopez this summer. And it seems like going into this season, the focus would very much be on Jalen Green, Van Vliet, and Jabari Smith. And if those guys are producing at better levels than Şengün, I don't really have an issue with them getting more opportunities than him. I'm not necessarily sure that's going to be the case, though, right? And that's what's going to be interesting this year from a fantasy basketball perspective. If Şengün is again for the 3rd consecutive season producing as the best per minute producer, is he still going to be like 4th in minutes? Is he still going to be like 5th in shot attempts? Right? I'm not necessarily sure like what's going to happen, but there are 2 things that are important to note here. Right? Stephen Silas is gone, and the Rockets have just brought in a new coach. 2, Kevin Porter Jr. is gone. He was one of the team's highest usage guys last year, and he's likely not going to come back. So there are reasons for optimism there with Şengün, but I've reached the point with the Rockets using Şengün where I'm like, I'll believe it when I see it. Where are you on that?
Yeah, pretty much the same. It's like there's been so many situations. We saw it last season when Porter had that thigh injury, and they just said, "All right, Şengün, we're running everything through it," and he just put up unbelievable numbers. And we went, "Oh man, this is it. It's happening." And then Porter went back, and we saw dribble, pull ups, and ISOs, and reducing the role of the best player on the team. Which there's been reporting coming out that it was directed down from on top of like, no, we want all these things to work around Kevin Porter, which obviously seems absolutely insane at this point in time. It looked silly at the time, but it looked insane then. But not my issue with Şengün. It's more that when I coded, project all this stuff out, I look at it and go, look, there's a huge wide range of outcomes here. They lean into it. He plays 34 minutes a night. He's like a top 20 player, right? He puts up unbelievable numbers. He runs so much stuff. Or they fall into the, well, we're going to blame every single defensive collapse on Şengün, which is what happened last season, as you would know, how we sit multiple just fourth quarters the entire time because guys were getting blown by in the perimeter and then he couldn't recover and help, which, again, is being scapegoated. Do they do that again? And then because they have a second-year Jabari Smith, they have Jock Landale, who's capable as a backup. They have Tari Eason, who could play the 4 as well, that keeps Şengün in this weird 27-minute-a-night limbo, which pushes him outside the top 90. So he's one of those guys where I go, I know he can do it. I know that he's got all these skills and he can do it, but I have to know that they know that he can do it. And I've been a little bit more encouraged with it through the preseason. I'm still not 100% there. Like you said, I got to say it. Like, I have to see them do it.
Yeah, and I do think that it helps that they have insulated him defensively in that they've added a lot of quality defenders at the perimeter. Even to some extent in that forward rotation, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, they've drafted these guys over the years. They're coming into their second seasons. They're going to be more capable defensively. So it's going to help kind of protect him, shield him from that blame, right? Like there's not going to be as many breakdowns, and as a result, he's not going to be yanked as much, right? I would hope. But as you said, we do have to see it, and they did add some guys in the offseason that are convenient fallback options if things don't go the way that let's say Ime Udoka wants it to go. He puts in Jeff Green to end games sometimes, or maybe he decides that, hey, we're going to go with a smaller look here. We're going to go with Jabari at center, which I think actually might be a good thing to explore, but not at the expense of not exploring Şengün, right? Like that's kind of where I'm at with that. So projecting out, let's say Şengün isn't on this team. What is his upside as a fantasy player?
I think that he has got, like we know that Jokic is the number 1 player in fantasy, and the other guys he's always compared to is Sabonis, who's like a top 15 to top 13 player. There's absolutely no reason that he can't be around that Sabonis area. Maybe he's not getting 7 assists a game, but 18, 19 points, 8, 9 rebounds, over a steal, over a block, solid percentages, hopefully, and then 5 to 6 assists, which is a top 15, top 20 player. He's probably not going. Is their team ever going to say we're going to run the offense the way that Sabonis does? Where he averaged like 7.5 per game last season or something along those lines? Like, I'm not sure it gets to that, but as a upper level, like, what is he? He's 21. Like, as a guy in 4 or 5 years' time, like, there's very easy top 15 upside in what Şengün can bring, because when also he came in through the draft, like in my actual real life draft board, I had him number 5 overall. So I am a little bit like biased overall in my projection, because I saw what he did. I watched him. I went, this is unbelievable. Like, this is real upside in this draft. Hasn't really been disproven to me on the court, and then all the stats really align to be a monster fantasy guy if he fits into the right situation.
Yeah, you had him even higher than me. I had him 7th, and like I thought I was an outlier, but like 5 is wow. Yeah, I mean he killed it at the BSL. He really did. Yeah. He was the MVP of that league, and I mean that's a really good league. Like, people underestimate just how projectable being one of the best players in one of the best leagues in the world is to NBA production. Onto a less frustrating note. After a disappointing rookie year campaign, Jabari Smith has played really well in the Summer League and now in the preseason. And I talked about this after watching him in the Summer League. It's obvious that he really worked on his ball handling this summer. It's also obvious that his confidence, the confidence that he displayed at Auburn, is back in full force. Like, he really looks comfortable right now. And I speculated last year that falling from 1 to 3 on draft night might have messed with his head a little bit, and Kelly Eco kind of reported on that this summer. From a long-term perspective, what have you thought about Jabari as a prospect and a fantasy producer? Like, were you ever worried about him turning it around last year?
He was a guy that I was relatively high on, say, coming into last season as a fantasy guy. I thought they'll give him solid enough minutes. He had these unbelievably high steal and block numbers in college as well, which is always a great thing to translate through to the NBA. He shot the ball well, but then like the steals didn't come. The minutes were a bit low. We all know the story about no plays being run for him. The shots didn't fall. But then towards the end of March and April, when most people weren't watching the Rockets outside of you and I guess most of the listeners here, things started to turn around a little bit for him. But what we needed to see was confidence. It was more usage, but it was just, can the shots go in? And I do think that so much stuff messed with his head, whether it was the draft or the fact that the coaches would just treat him like a nothing. Like, you are an absolute afterthought to everything. He's like, hey, what's going on? Like, I got picked in the top 3 here. Can I get the ball ever? I know that the ball's not going in, but there was a clear confidence issue with all that stuff. And the weird thing about, you talked about Summer League. Like, I was there watching that first game of Summer League, and I was talking with Jackson Gatlin of Locked On Rockets, and we were sitting there, we were just talking about rotations and how it all works. And he's like, what do we do with Jabari? And then, like, in that first half, he was bad. Like, he was disinterested. He was nowhere near. I go, what is going on here? Like, this looks terrible. Is he going to, like, could he lose that starting spot? Like, Jackson's gone, it would take quite a bit to happen. I go, have you seen what's happening here? Tyree Eason's killing it, and Jabari is absolutely out on his own, not concentrating. And then he just dominated for the next 6 quarters and was talking smack to everybody. He couldn't miss. And I went, okay, well, something changed. And I don't know what it was, but something changed. And he's carried that through the preseason. And that is so when in terms of having confidence in him, he needs to have confidence in himself, because we've seen multiple different things here of where, like, if he's just a little bit off or he just loses a bit of focus, then things can go awry really quickly. But when it all comes together, well, there is like a real big stat stuffing sort of producer, which again is carried over through to the preseason, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that first half of that Summer League performance. I remember before Rockets Media Day, Ime Udoka kind of said that when he first got the job, that every roster, every starting spot, every position was going to be up for grabs. So your ranking, your whatever, nothing was going to matter, right? Just how you produced in training camp, that was going to be the most important thing. And I tweeted during that first half, like, if that's going to be the case here, Tari Eason.
I did the same thing.
Yeah, he was great. He was really, really good. And I think he was great throughout the rest of the Summer League. I mean, that's not to take anything away from Tari Eason, but Jabari really turned it on. Like, he was the best performer in Summer League, bar none. Like I said at that time, he looked better than Usher was in Summer League, right? Like, he was great. He was really, really good. And it's nice to see him translate that to the preseason, and hopefully that translates over to the regular season. So from a short-term perspective, Do you think that translates, right? Like, is he someone looking that you look at drafting in the 6th or 7th round in a 9 cat, or would you be a little bit more conservative with him?
He is pushing up pretty high at the moment. Like, originally he was going like in the 110s, that sort of range, and now he goes in like the 80s or 90s. I think it's fair enough, but one of the things that I always preach when I'm talking fantasy value on my shows, okay, the numbers will look great. Like he's averaging 18 points, he's playing 23 minutes a night. Those are true numbers. But he's shooting 62%, which has just got no chance of sticking. Like, he's not going to be a 62% shooter. So is this a nice little hot streak? Sure, is it? And players have hot streaks all the time, and then they cool off. But is it a sustainable level of production? It's not really, because he's still only got, even in these preseason games, a 20% usage. I would like that to push a little bit higher. So there is the risk if you see these numbers and you just look at, honestly, raw numbers and go, well, 18 and 8 in 24 minutes is awesome. But if that 62% is 48%, then it's like 15 and 8. And it's like, it's still good, but it's not quite as good. And then people can often react to just the bright, big, flashing numbers versus the how did we get there? Is it sustainable? Where does it stick? How does it stick? Like, I've got no doubt he's improving his field goals from last season. I've got no question about that. He's not going to be, what was he, 41, 42%? He's not going to do that. Like, I know that's going to improve, but if it's 51 or 48 or 55, they're really big differences. So when you're looking at round 8, we take these sort of picks there where you want to get 20, 30 spots of upside out of it. Like, that's the ideal. That's how you end up winning. It's not about just making every pick provide the value of where you take them. Like, as the further you get in, like, I need the guy that I took at pick 100, like Lauri Markkanen last season, to be a top 30 player. That's how I end up winning, is getting that extra value. And if I take Jabari 80, do I think that there is any way that I can squint and see top 50 numbers? I don't know. I don't think there is. He can be totally good in that area, but I'm not sure how he gets that next level, especially when Dylan Brooks and Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet and Şengün are all having the ball in their hands. Not one of those guys is going to be shy about having the ball in their hands in that starting 5 either.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to be someone to really pay close attention to, especially to close out this preseason and to start the season. I think confidence is a big thing with him. It affects so much of his game. And I think having a coach like Ime is actually going to be beneficial to him. He's actually the one who pushed him to play Summer League because he was not going to play before that. And Ime was like, why not? Like, why shouldn't you play? You should really go out there and be the leader for this team. And I think that is going to play a big part in this season if it goes well, right? Like that jump start to his confidence. So when you look at Jabari as someone that's kind of a, as you said, like a 20% usage guy, right? Is that someone you're just like, you know what, he's a second-year player, and he's also not going to touch the ball that much. Maybe we shouldn't take that gamble in the 8th round. Or are you just someone that's like, you know what, like in the 8th round, you're probably going to get a role player anyways, so you might as well try and press your luck. And if it doesn't work out, you can go on the waiver wire and make up for it later.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, but we're also getting to that stage. I try to look at guys in that spot again, depending on what I'm needing on my team when I'm building it out, but also to look to go, how likely is it that he becomes a 6th round player? Like, how does he get there? And I go, maybe not. But if I get him at the end of round 9, for example, then the chances of him beating that by 25 spots are a lot higher than beating 25 spots at pick 80 or whatever. So that's the sort of different calculation on that. So does he have a path to 27 usage? I don't really see how he does that. But what if he brings back the steals and blocks from Auburn and he gets 1.2 of each of them? Well, then the value really does jump up. And then if he shoots 49%, then the value jumps up. So he's in that area. But it is the case with a lot of these guys who do perform or outperform maybe what they did last season in preseason, is that everyone just starts to push them higher, 5 spots, 6 spots, 10 spots. And then you get into that stage where you go, I've got to have him. And then it gets to a spot, well, the only way to go from here is like it's 5% up but 95% down from that spot. So you've always got to be like, he's good. I'd really like him. But we're at a spot where maybe the fact that he's pushing up and the next guy's pushing up and the next guy's pushing up means someone else is pushed down. And then that value comes to you in a different area.
So a player that I drafted with one of my last picks last year was Tari Eason, and I was betting on 2 things. One, I thought Eason was going to be a permanent monster because he was an older rookie, and he did look awesome in the preseason. And 2, I kind of, and naively looking back at it, bet that Stephen Silas would just, at the end of the day, play the best players on the roster, the most minutes, irrespective to where they were drafted or how many vets were in front of them. Obviously, I was wrong on that second bet, but let me just say this. My draft is on Sunday. I'm probably not going to take him. However, he's 100% going to be on my watch list, and here's the reason for that. While I agree that Dylan Brooks and Jayshawn Tate deserve to play more right now, I think there's a non-zero chance that Tate gets moved at the deadline and the pathway for Eason playing 25-plus minutes per game goes on the table. And if that happens, he could be a waiver wire steal, in my opinion. What have you thought about that?
Let's swing it back to last preseason because he was putting up great numbers, and it was one of those guys that I was arguing with people on my channel or my followers, and people were starting to take him at like 100. I go, hey, if you want to take him in the second last round, let's go. But how do the minutes come? A lot of people don't, and that's another thing with fantasy. It's like every night there's 240 minutes only to go around, and if you are slated to come off the bench, getting over 20 is reserved for very few people. Not many guys get that. It's really hard to get that playing time. And then Stephen Silas played him exclusively as Jabari's backup. He never played at the 3 really at all. The only times he ever played next to Jabari is when Jabari played at centre, which was a really small amount. And it's really hard to do that in 18 or 19 minutes or to be useful enough as a fantasy contributor. In the very last portion of the season, he started playing a little bit at the 3. It worked out really well. I think that, you said Jayshawn Tate, I think he's very clearly at this point better than Jayshawn Tate. I think Tate had that really good rookie season sort of out of nowhere 2-3 years ago, but it was on a team that was like bereft of prospects and talent, and I don't really think he can shoot. He's got the knee problems. He's obviously older and not on this timeline. The only reason they would put him in there is because Udoka loves the hard work mentality that he puts in, which is true, right? But I think that Eason's a better player than Tate. I could debate that Eason might have some better characteristics than Dylan Brooks does at times as well. But it's all going to come down to like, where do they play him? Is it just exclusively at the 4? Do they think that his lack of shooting can be worked around at the 3 if Jabari's nailing them at the 4? That's going to be the minutes. He's worth grabbing for sure. But I always like to look, what is the clear path for a big role? And it's not super clear.
No,
he doesn't need 30 minutes. But is there 25? And I always will tell my followers and people watching, go, you got to play the 240 game. There's 240 a night, 10 guys. Work it out. Have a look. How do you fit the minutes in? And when you look at Tari, you look at that, or with this team, if Dylan's playing 30, Jabari gets 32, and Şengün gets 31, or whatever, maybe there's 19 for Tari Eason, maybe. And that's like if you really drop Tate down and you don't play Whitmore at all, and Men plays 17, like figuring it all out is really hard to do.
Yeah, which is why you don't draft him, right? You keep him on. You just watch to see how this rotation shakes out in the beginning of the season. Then perhaps if something happens at the trade deadline, then you can make your move before someone else does or something like that, right? Like that might be the opportunity to do it.
I've got no problem drafting him, right? Because you never know. Like we might get their opening night and they just say, right, he's our 6th man. He's playing 27 minutes a night. He's playing 3-4. Sometimes they go super small. He plays at the 5 and you go, that's great. And I've got him on my roster. But if we get to game 2 and he's playing 17 minutes a night, like you can't hold him for 6 months until we get to the trade deadline. Like you just say, well, this is not how this rotation's working. There's not enough here. Let's go grab somebody else. But that level of, I'm actually just preparing to do a show that will come out on my channel probably in a day or two about the guys that, hey, if their minutes actually crank up, who are the real guys who want to target? And he's one of them. And if I've got him on my roster for a week to begin the season and he's playing 18 minutes a night, but then like something happens and he cranks up, I've got him. But you can't afford to hold that till February. So it's really just depending. Let's see what happens when games actually start to count. And part of it also is like, I try to, like, it is about looking at fantasy numbers and value, but some of it, I try and lean a little bit more into this, is like, do I actually think these other guys are good, and will eventually the coaches work it out? Now, when there's a coach like your old mate last season, I have a little bit less faith that he's going to work out who the best players should be on a given night. But most times you go, okay, this is happening now, but is this guy actually good enough to sustain in this role, or will he get found out and they eventually have to play the better players?
No, you're right. Cutting bait early is, like, I think a big part of, like, at least from my experience, like, I think it gives you a leg up, right? Because those first weeks, you know, it may not seem like it matters because the playoff is like 20 weeks away. They add up. You know, they add up. If you're like a 9 seed and it's only because you have a player on your roster like Kyrie Irving who's unvaccinated, like, I think you should just cut bait, right? It's one of those things that you have to be really, really careful about, you know, knowing when to stick with your gambles. Speaking of a gamble, let's talk about the backcourt for a little bit. And I want to talk about Amen Thompson. Because I have when I'm drafting, I have a pretty blanket policy of like, unless the guy is like a clear generational talent, like I don't draft rookies until late in the draft. So like other than Wembanyama, I'm probably not looking at most of these guys until like round 10. However, I wrote about this last week. I think there's a real chance that we're all kind of underplaying Amen Thompson's Rookie of the Year chances. That's not me saying I think he's going to win it. That's me saying that even coming off the bench for both Van Vliet and Green, I think there's a real chance he can be in that dark horse conversation. And I just think he has this phenomenal level of athleticism and IQ. And I'm just willing to bet with players like that. Players like that, I'm willing to take the risk with like my 10th pick, and if it doesn't work out, that's cool. Like I'll find a player on the waiver wire and make up for it. Like I'm fine with it. I've heard you say that before. Like you win the draft with your later round picks. Is he someone that, in your opinion, is worth at least gambling on with those late picks, or would you say that you're just like, you know what, let's stick with, like, if you're going to take that gamble, go with someone like Brandon Miller, go with someone like Scoot Henderson?
There's no chance I'd be taking Brandon Miller. Like I don't think he's going to play much either. And I don't think he's that good. Scoot, yes. Now Amen's an interesting one because before Kevin Porter's situation developed, I was like, okay, I really like Amen Thompson. And again, going back to Summer League, I was talking again. We're standing there with Jackson watching the game, and we're talking about. I go, look, Amen's going to be slated to be the backup point guard or backup guard to begin the season. I go, that's fine. I go, I reckon by the time we hit 1st of November, he's going to look that good that these other players, Kevin Porter, maybe Dylan Brooks, look completely inferior to what this guy's able to do. So I really rate him that highly as a prospect, and I had him at number 3 overall in that draft, pretty close to number 2 actually, and I just think that he was going to be able to show out. Then Kevin Porter got suspended. I go, all right, cool. He might get minutes at the backup 1, 2, and 3, and that gives him 26, 27, and 9. And then they signed Reggie Bullock, and I was like, okay, what are we doing here? Like, why would Reggie Bullock come here on a minimum if he wasn't going to get rotation minutes? And that means that if Jay Sean Tate's going to play, and if Tari Eason's going to play, and if Bullock's going to play, then those minutes at the backup 3 disappear. Like, they're not there. So he's probably getting whatever minutes are behind Jalen Green and behind Fred VanVleet now, which does put a bit of a cap on that overall upside. And as much as I think Amen's going to be good, I really doubt he's going to be better than Fred VanVleet this season. Now, is he going to be better than Jalen Green? I don't know. I'm not going to rule that one out, but I don't think it's going to start that way. So I've gone very much back and forward on Amen. Like, not sure where the minutes are. Oh, there they are. Oh, now they've sort of pushed back a bit. Because the Bullock thing just completely threw me off. It's like, oh, what has happened? Why did that happen? And how does Amen now push through that?
I just think there's a real chance where he's just a force that's undeniable, right? Like sometimes,
sure. Yep.
yeah, sometimes there are rookies that are just like that. They're just like, they're going to push their way in regardless of what their surrounding circumstances. And I don't think his surrounding circumstance is bad enough to prevent it, is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Like, I think, there are circumstances where it's like, like Tari Eason last year, where it's like their circumstances were around him were bad enough to prevent even the highest outcomes. With Amen, it's like, yeah, it's not ideal, but it's not like I can't blink, I can't squint and see a situation in where like, oh, he's producing at like a 7th or 8th round value because he's just too athletic and too fast and too smart for everybody, right? Like those are the rookies that are usually the best rookie year producers, right? They're just like they're playing at the same rate as the rest of the players on the court, whereas the other rookies are kind of like taking their time to adjust to the speed of the game. And I think Amen is someone where I'm like, I'm keeping an eye on that. And he had a really nice preseason game last night. Obviously, that's just preseason; it doesn't really matter. But it's someone where I'm like, I can't help shake this feeling that there's something here.
Yeah, no, I'm with that. And look, it was tough to see how to look at these guys coming out of Overtime Elite, right? It was like we've never seen a top-level prospect. The 2 guys that we saw come out the year before, Dominic Barlow, I thought looked really good in the NBA, and then Jean Montero was playing really well over in Europe. So, okay, these guys are good enough, but they were like undrafted players who were playing at a small level. And we saw Amen and Asar's numbers coming out of Overtime Elite. You go, they're averaging 4 steals and 2.5 blocks. None of this is real. How is any of this possibly real? So I had to dial all my projections and translations back. And then I saw them at Summer League and went, oh no, they're just actually doing the same thing. And they just do everything exactly the same, and they're blocking shots and they're getting steals and insane numbers, and they're rebounding and they're passing, and their offensive feel and their defensive feel is exactly what all of those stats would have suggested, which gave me a great level of confidence that they're going to be able to do that in the NBA. And again, I really do think it's not going to take a huge amount of time before he just does become undeniable. But that would mean it would probably mean not giving up on Jalen Green, but definitely reducing some of his importance in the overall lineup.
Right. And you kind of hinted on this a little bit. We were talking about Jalen Green. And I want to talk about him for a minute. And this is probably kind of where fantasy basketball and real basketball kind of diverge the most, in that I am very high on Jalen Green, the basketball player, long term, right? Jalen Green, the fantasy basketball player next year, and even somewhat long term, it's different, right? Like I'm not sure if I would place that same value. You can even hear Josh talking about guys like Alperen Şengün, top 15, top 20 potential as like a highest outcome. I'm not sure if like we're having that conversation in terms of like real basketball, right? It's totally right. So we have to contextualize this a little bit. But with Jalen, it's like, let's say he hits his highest end outcomes next year, which I'm conservative about, because I think third-year leaps are kind of overstated. I think you're more likely to see fourth-year leaps than third-year leaps. But let's just say he does. Let's say he does hit that highest end outcome for whatever his next season is. His most frequent comparisons are like, Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker. Like, these are the types of players that he gets compared to the most. Well, if there's so many of those players already out there and you're drafting looking to get a guy like that, why wouldn't you just take that guy versus betting on someone like Green? Like, that's kind of where my hesitancy with Green is. Like, I know last year you were a guy who was like willing to take him in the 80s, I believe. I'm not sure.
Yep, that's about right. Yep.
Yeah. So has that at all changed? Or are you still at that point where it's like, yeah, if it gets to that point where he's still available at pick 83, I'm taking him?
It's really going to depend on the way that my team looks, because he's going to score pretty well. But I am a little concerned with bringing in other players like Van Vliet, that he just won't have the same leeway to take as many shots. And last season, I guess it was considered a little bit of a disappointing season for Green, but most of his numbers outside of some of the shooting stuff improved. Like, he was able to generate more counting stats, he played more minutes. But the problem with him, compared to those names you mentioned, Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, is they're all good passers, right? They all can put up good passes. They're not great passers, but they can function as a lead ball handler, a pseudo point guard at times. Whereas Jalen's like rebound and assist numbers are extraordinarily low. He doesn't generate any steals. He doesn't block any shots. And he's not a good free throw shooter. He's an okay one, but he's not hitting 87% like LaVine is. He's not getting to the line 7 times, or that Beal was, or hitting 85%, or Devin Booker hitting 91% from the line. He's like at 78% and 3 or 4 attempts, which for fantasy is not great. So what he can do is score, but so many of these other categories are they're just low. Like, he just doesn't do enough of those things. And now you bring in Amen Thompson and you bring in Fred VanVleet, who are going to have the ball in their hands. Does Jalen develop into that pick and roll guy, that ball handler? It was hard with Porter there last season, but again, have they cleared that path for him to do it this season? I don't think so. So I don't. Is he going to be more like Anthony Simons or Tyler Hero? But maybe they're better passers than him as well.
Yeah, and again, like real basketball, fantasy basketball, you're not saying that you're dismissing the possibility that Jalen becomes that guy long term. It's just like in terms of like drafting that guy next year, it's like, it's very tough, right? Because the rebounding numbers in particular are so damning. Like, when you're drafting guards that can't pass that well yet, like, you just don't want to like dismiss the other categories, right? If you're saying you're not getting more than 3 or 4 rebounds a game, I'd rather look elsewhere, right? Or at least I'd rather bank on something that's more bankable, right? And with Jalen, I actually do think there is a chance that he becomes a pretty good passer. Like, I think what he's doing in the pick and roll, operating with Alperen Şengün in the preseason, is pretty impressive. And like, I think he's taken micro steps every year as a passer. Right, like in the rookie year, he was actually a much better dump off passer than I saw him at the G League. Sophomore year, he took more of those kick out passes to the 3-point line than I saw his rookie year. And in the preseason, you're seeing some more pick and roll operability. But again, these are micro steps. He's not near where Devin Booker is as a passer. Nowhere close yet. And next year, it's just very hard for me to say he's going to get there in that third season. It's just, I think if you're looking to bet, like, this is for Rockets fans more broadly. I know there's a lot of people that are banking on a third-year leap with Jalen Green. I would just pour some cold water on that for right now. Like, just wait. Be willing to be patient with a guy like this. I think fourth year, fifth year, is I think where you're more likely going to see him push into whatever he's going to be. This year, he's probably going to take a step because he was kind of lateral last year, but that doesn't mean he's going to take the step into all-stardom, the step into whatever final form Jalen Green is. That's kind of where I'm at.
The third year, fourth year leap stuff is interesting. I do a lot of research and data analysis on this sort of stuff. What I've tended to find is the guys who turn into legitimate stars take a big step in year three. They go from being sort of average with deficiencies into becoming very good. Not great, but very good in year three. And then their year four becomes, okay, well, now we're elevating to real star status. There are plenty of players who go from sort of average year three to quite good in year four, but it's unlikely for that guy then to, from what I've seen, then take that next step to being that star player. So usually, again, there's always going to be outliers. So usually, though, if a guy doesn't take that step where you go, oh, wow, he's the guy we're now talking about. He's in the fringe all-star discussions. He's taking gigantic leaps into one certain area in year three. Then him getting to that absolute, top 25 level NBA guy in year 5 or 6 onwards, it gets a little bit harder to do. They can still be really good players. I'll use an example of like Devin Vassell in San Antonio, obviously in a different situation, but he was put into a different role, upped his usage on a team that was equally as bad as the Rockets. But what he did was like, okay, now I'm going to start running all these pick and rolls, and all of his pick and roll numbers went through the roof. It was like his points per possession, it all basically doubled. So his capability of being a ball handler as a shooting guard and a playmaker like that went through the roof. I'm not saying he's going to become a star, but he did that last season, took that step forward. Can Jalen do that this season? Can he show that one level of improvement in a certain area? But I don't know. And the team is not projected to be as bad as what they were last season, as what the Spurs were. So will he get those opportunities? And that's, I guess, where taking that next step for him becomes really critical. I still think he is going to be good, but does he take the Anthony Edwards year 2 to year 3 leap that we saw last season? That's where I go, I'm not sure he's quite there yet.
Yeah, it's tough. It's really, really tough. And again, like, it's just with guys like this, like it's not that there's not a possibility where they're not great. It's just that especially when in fantasy, it's like there are safer bets on the table. And it's just if there are so many comparable options, you would just rather take the safer bet. So what I like about watching you is that you are not afraid. And I say that as I see a lot of people who are afraid to do this, to call out coaching, right? Like, because it's very relevant to what you're discussing, right? Whether certain players play, whether certain players don't play, whether certain players should be playing, all that stuff. Like, it's very pertinent to your job. And I think when I look at what Stephen Silas was last year, I think he clearly was holding Houston back from doing what I think was probably a reasonable facsimile of like their medium range of outcomes. Like, I thought they were I had them as a 30-win team. I probably would have dropped that down to 28 looking in hindsight. Like, I think they probably should have won 6 more games last year. And that's not me saying that I think that Stephen Silas can't be a good coach one day, but I think he objectively did a bad job here in Houston. Looking at Ime Udoka, he wasn't the first guy I would have went for if I'm the Rockets. I was looking at guys like Frank Vogel and Nick Nurse kind of more seriously, but that's not to say that I thought Ime was a bad hire. When you look at what he brings to this Rockets team and what he did in Boston, what's the difference here? Like, how big of an upgrade are the Rockets getting from a coaching perspective? Is it as drastic as some are saying it is? Is it one of those things where you're even going from a bad coach to an average coach is a big jump in itself?
There's a couple of things to look at there. And you're right, I'll call out coaches all the time, but one thing's really, really clear about what I say. Like, I am never calling out coaches from hey, I talked about this guy for fantasy, why don't you play him? You're making my team bad. Like, I hate that stuff. Right?
Yeah.
That's never what I'm doing. It's about, this doesn't make sense from a real life perspective. Mm-hmm. What are you doing? Like, this doesn't make any cognitive sense in terms of the right players, where you are in your development, all that stuff. And usually, like, those coaches end up being found out. Like, the 2 worst coaches in the NBA were Dwayne Casey and Stephen Silas last season, and they're gone, right? Rightfully so, because they were doing things that just made no sense really at any point through their tenure. The Udoka one is really intriguing, and this is what happens when I try to look at the league, all 30 teams. I try to look at it neutral, unbiased. I can't remove all bias. I have certain bias, but I look at everything neutrally. So, but fans of teams, and there'll be people who watch your show and listen to your show who go, "Man, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He hates the Rockets." All right, this will happen. Someone actually did it to me on one of my shows when I was talking about the Rockets the other day. He was a Rockets fan. He goes, "Man, you got no idea about Ime Udoka. You said that he was a bad coach." And I go, what I said was his first season in Boston, the first 3 months, he was really bad. Like they was terrible. There was infighting in the locker room. He was going out in every press conference and calling out his players and taking no responsibility for anything. And we heard it. We heard the rumblings, and there was like arguments and closed door meetings. And then something happened in January, and it all clicked. Some of that is the personality of the players, how they take that on. But what I was saying is, Udoka was great. It was unbelievable to be able to take that team as a first-year coach to a finals and play that well. He was dreadful for the first 2 months. Like everything he said, I go, what is this guy doing? He's just throwing every player under the bus. Now, that's not going to work for every player. There'll be some players, if he still maintains that, or he might have just learned his lessons, go, well, I can't actually approach these guys in this way. But for some players, that won't work, that sort of approach. So it's not as easy as saying, unbelievable coach, finals as a first-year guy, he's going to turn everything around, because he was quite poor in learning those lessons early on and then turned it around and was awesome down the stretch. Does that work with this group of players who is a little bit younger than the Boston group, although bringing in the veterans helps? Yeah, is he still able to have that level of success? Does his style work there? Because it worked out perfectly, but it's not always about what the end result is. Sometimes it's about the process that gets you there. Have you made the right adjustments, and does that work everywhere? And I don't know. I would lean towards he's going to be good enough. It feels like he has learnt those lessons, but I'm not going to completely dismiss those first couple of months where I was like, what is it? Does this guy know what he's doing? Because nothing made sense on that team to start that season.
100% agree with what you're saying. People really forget about those first 3 months in Boston. I talk to a lot of stats people, right? And this one guy in particular, in those first 3 months of the season, I was just like he seemed a little stressed out, right? And I asked him, like, what's going on, man? He's like, I can't figure out what's going on with the Celtics team. Like, they should be much better than what they are right now. Like, their point differential is this. They should be like this team, and instead they're at this team. And I was like, well, it's possible that their wins are really, what your models have them out to be, and they're probably just not closing out games the way they should be. And that, closing out games actually is pretty indicative on coaching, right? Like, I think a lot of times coaches don't receive the credit for like teams that are really great at closing out games, right? And Ime, those first 3 months, was terrible at it. And he did turn it around, as you said. He did make the NBA Finals. He was very good, but he did some learning on the job, and he only has 1 year under his belt. He's relatively. It's hard. It sounds sacrilegious to say, considering he made the finals. He is a relatively unproven commodity, right? He has 1 year under his belt, right? I think that's the point I want to hammer home. Like, guys like Vogel had almost a decade under their belt, right? And they're consistently pushing their rosters above expectations, right? And that Boston team did push the roster above expectation, but they only did it once, right? Yep. And it's one of those things where I think it's an upgrade, right? Because I think I think it's 100%. Like, because considering what I thought of Silas last year versus what I thought of Udoka as a coach last year. Like, it's just two different planets, right? Like, it's not like I think Udoka was like one of the 4 or 5 best coaches in the NBA, but even if he was like the 18th or 20th best coach in the NBA, going from 30th to 18th is huge. It's a massive leap. And I think the way he gets through to young players is particularly attractive. I think it was attractive for the front office, right? Like, someone who's willing to say the hard truths with them. But projecting out next season, I'm where you are. Like, I'm wondering how receptive they are to that just 1 year in. Maybe that message gets through 2-3 years in when they're a little bit older, like that Boston group. But will that get through that first year? It's tough. It's hard.
Yeah, it is. And like you mentioned Nick Nurse before, like Nick Nurse won the championship as a first-year coach, right? And then 4 years later, like, every player seemed to hate him, because he's a hard ass, and he like says he calls out players continually in press conferences, and it just stopped working. And that team didn't know where they were going. They were all over the place. And that relationship pretty clearly soured. You know, Udoka made the finals as a first-year coach. That doesn't mean you're just going to keep doing it every single year. Like, things change, and things like Tom Thibodeau did this as well, although Thibodeau has made adjustments, right? And he's not quite as aggressive with his players the way that he was in Minnesota or even in Chicago. He's adapted his approach. So that's the thing with one of these things. It's great. It's great that we've got that as a data point that he improved so much and he took the team to the finals. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen, and so much stuff can change as players change and evolve, and other coaches evolve around him as well. Like, what are his opposing coaches doing? Have they figured out what he was doing? And then he didn't make the necessary adjustments because of stubbornness. Like, I don't know. But there's no doubt it's a positive. How good is it? Is it finals level caliber? Is he a top 5 coach? I don't think so. But can't rule any of that stuff out. It's more just about, at least we've got an upgrade, and we've got to understand some of the positives and negatives that we've seen in that short time that he's been a coach.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to ask you a question. I'm more of a fan, right? Like, because obviously you do this for a living, but like, just watching the Rockets next year as a fan, like, personally, I am very excited to watch them. Right? I'm obviously biased, but I've sat through some miserable basketball these past 3 years. It felt like watching the Rockets was homework to a certain extent, right? And this year, it's like I want to watch every minute, and I want to rewatch it every minute, right? Like, whereas I was rewatching minutes of the Rockets, I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this. This half these players aren't relevant to their long-term future. Half these players suck, right? Yep. And like now it's like, okay, there are like 6 guys here that are very relevant to their future. These veterans are very interestingly mixed in. And I'm like, I kind of think they're going to make a little bit of noise. It's like maybe a 12th, maybe a 10th, who knows, seed in the Western Conference. And that to me is exciting versus the level of basketball I've been accustomed to. Now, as a non-biased observer, where are you on the Rockets? Is it just in terms of watching them?
It's 100% better. Like, it's so frustrating watching a team that is poorly organized and makes baffling decisions at all times, which is basically the way things ran the last couple of years. Like, you don't need me to tell you that, watching Daishan Nix run out as the backup point guard was something where you go, what are we doing? Like, what's actually, and no offense to the guy, because he copped a lot of abuse from it, and I feel bad, but he shouldn't have been put in that position to do that. It didn't make any sense for him to be in the role that he was in. But you mentioned it, like, no matter what sort of position you go to on this team, there's something exciting that can happen. Like, hey, Cam Whitmore might not be a rotation player this season, but it's exciting to watch if he gets out there and what he's able to do. Like, what can the men do? How does Fred VanVleet look? Can Dylan Brooks win us more games than he shoots us out of? I don't know, but it's at least something interesting to be able to see. Like, what does all of this stuff move into? It's an exciting new era to see these improvements, and hopefully we see things that just, like, there's nothing worse than watching something go, I don't understand a single thing of why you've made these calls. And while I can't really sit here and just boil it all down to one or two factors. I feel like I almost can. Like, Silas was one of them. He was somewhat directed by the front office, but also the way that they just built everything around Kevin Porter Jr. stunted Şengün, stunted Jalen Green, stunted Tari Eason, even, like, everybody. And he's gone. He's not officially gone, but he's gone. So those two things out of there makes his team eminently better and more watchable.
Yeah, 100%. As well as, like, potential leaps that we might see from certain guys, right? Okay. Yeah, like I think that's what's made this team appointment viewing for the first time in God knows how many years for me. I can't wait to watch the Rockets next year. Thank you so much for coming on, Josh.
No, mate, it's been awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Why don't you go ahead and plug where people can find your work and follow you on social media?
Social media, it's just redrock_bball on Twitter. And host the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, which is obviously a podcast, and it's a YouTube channel where 10 days away from the start of the season, so just getting everything cranked out before the season starts in terms of drafts and rankings and all that sort of stuff. And then I work over at Basketball Monster, where we project out every single player for every single day for the entire season for fantasy basketball.
Yeah, definitely go follow Josh and all his work. I meant every word I said about him. I think he's really, really very good at what he does. And if you've never played fantasy basketball before, go do it. It's really, really fun. It's not just is it really fun. Like, I think it makes you a smarter basketball fan. And and I think a lot of people might hear that statement and be like, how does playing this game make you, like, it does. It really does. Like, it's the same way that my nephew who plays 2K is like actually pretty informed on the NBA because he knows the ins and outs of every team because he's playing with all these different teams. Like I think the fantasy basketball has that same effect. I think I'm very pro more people playing fantasy basketball.
As am I. I wish more people did because it does. It improves your knowledge. It's why I think that at least there needs to be one fantasy person needs to be involved in like voting for NBA awards because there's not many people who watch every team with the level of detail that we have to. So why shouldn't we be at least have some input into that? Because I can tell you, I know more about what happened on the backups of the Rockets than the national media do. Like I know that, and that's we have to know this. And if you want to know more about the NBA, like playing fantasy and video games, they're the two things that improve your knowledge of a sport 100%.
For sure, absolutely. I think somebody should get a vote. I think that should be you, Josh. I'll talk to you down the road. Be sure to go check out all his content. And yeah, guys, I'll talk to you guys later.